Oh, hello there! Welcome to another episode. Today, we have finally finished smoothing the insides of the intakes, and we're now preparing to glue them together. It may be, at this point, you would paint the parts. However, as previously mentioned, I have something special in mind for this model, so I'm going to not. Upon dry fitting, I realised the parts need a slight bit of sanding before they will fit together. As the two surfaces I'm sanding will be glued together, I can use a slightly coarser grit to wear away plastic faster. Few swipes, check. Few swipes, check. You can do this slowly until the parts fit together flush. In this situation, I'm going to do it until I judge it's good enough, as the melting action of the glue will help lessen the gaps. Plus, I feel with this part it would be easy to fill and sand when they're together. Once the glue is applied, I find this an appropriate time to use a little help to hold parts together. While they probably would stick with just gravity holding them, I feel this wouldn't close the small uneven gaps there are, so I opted to use elastic bands this time. You can just hold it, but a bumper pack of elastic bands are relatively cheap. Look carefully at the technique I use. This requires a bit of practice to learn, but I stretch one piece of the elastic band to a degree where it's not stressed enough that it's going to snap, but stressed enough it will put the right amount of pressure on the parts. Once I have that, I wrap the next bit of band around and do the same. I do this until I get to the final free piece of elastic band. If I feel I need to stretch it to the point where it will snap, I simply don't wrap it around again and let it loosen slightly. It also depends on the robustness of the parts I'm gluing. Fortunately, these parts are quite thick, and as such I'm comfortable putting a reasonable amount of pressure on them. However, with kits that have thinner moulding, I feel the plastic will bend or snap. I will use a lot less force, or opt for another option to hold the parts together. As I said, it takes some getting used to. You may make mistakes, unfortunately that's part of learning. I then put a few more elastic bands on, then set the part aside. I will check on it occasionally to make sure it's not warping and it's sticking properly with the elastic bands holding it. Technically, you can put on as many elastic bands as you want, but this can add too much force and snap the part. It also makes it harder to see the part and if it's behaving correctly. Typically I do one on either end and one in the middle. For longer parts, more, if applicable. While I'm still waiting for step 1 and this part of step 2 to dry, I move on to the other part of step 2, the main fuselage. You may notice that this part I have treated myself to some new sanding sticks. These work exactly the same as the ones I have been using, except have more options in what levels of grit I can use. Where appropriate, I will continue to use my original sanding sticks, as it's less wasteful. They're still useful. Now we'll start doing a lot more test fitting, as we're preparing to fit more parts from different steps together. Fitting the two parts of the fuselage together, I have suddenly realised that this is not quite such a good kit for beginners. Along with the big moulding issues, there are also a lot of parts that don't quite fit together properly, which will require more work to make them fit flush later. The only real benefit of this model for beginners is the relative lack of steps and easy to follow instructions. Anyway, having done this, I now know that this part will be a headache when I get to it. But for now, we will move back onto the now dried first step. For this, we will be gluing the seats in. We will do this while test fitting them to the fuselage part that houses the cockpit. I do this because having dry fitted the seats to the cockpit before, I noticed there was a reasonable amount of play in the seat mounts. Because of the play, gluing the seats at their most forward position or their most backward position may not be right to fit the seats through the upper fuselage. So, better to be safe than sorry, what I do here is glue both seats in, then dry fit the fuselage and adjust the seats using a fine set of modelling tweezers. Then leave them to gravity dry. A better way to do this may have been to dry fit the cockpit to the canopy, apply glue through the canopy and then place the seats in through the canopy, but hindsight's 2020. I dry fit quite often during this step. It's a very important step to get right. Though if the seats don't fit, it can be fixed later, it's an awful lot better to have to not fix it in the first place. At this point, I decided to give the intakes a look, and they haven't quite behaved as I would have liked. For one, the parts haven't stuck together properly, which means gently prying the parts apart a small amount to get some fresh glue in there. It is also a good place to show you how I use extra thin poly cement. The parts, fitted together to the best of my ability, don't sit quite right. This will require sanding. However, the application of this glue will slightly melt the seams and hopefully reduce the amount of sanding needed, in theory. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you at the next one. Scribbly dibbly doos!